To begin our investigation in who killed Theodore Roosevelt, our investigation team first looked at the possible motivations that someone would have to kill him. Some of the motivations that we decided on were trust busting, conservation efforts, and foreign affairs. Roosevelt was far more involved in these aspects than any other president before him, and as a result of his involvement, he negatively changed the lives of many people who had grown accustomed to their way of life with no government involvement. All of these areas of involvement for Roosevelt were sensitive topics that angered many people and would have caused people to want revenge on Roosevelt. After doing this, we then matched possible suspects that would have had these same motives to kill Roosevelt. Some of the suspects we came to were Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Emilio Aguinaldo, and J.P. Morgan. These were our four main suspects because they all were connected to our motives for killing Roosevelt. Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan would have been motivated to kill Roosevelt because of his trust-busting, which was a threat to them, and Aguinaldo would have been motivated because of Roosevelt's foreign affairs in the Philippines, in which he imperialized them. We then went deeper into each suspect's motives and narrowed it down to two, Carnegie and Morgan.
One motive that both Morgan and Carnegie had was the fear of losing their money and power if Roosevelt busted their trust, and therefore they had a reason to kill Roosevelt. Before Roosevelt's presidency, both of these men were able to form strong monopolies and accumulate large amounts of money because the U.S. government's laissez-faire economics policy supported big businesses. Carnegie was able to control the steel industries, while Morgan was able to control the banking and railroads. Since both men had garnered a lot of money and power through their respective monopolies, both men had a lot to lose when Roosevelt became president. Roosevelt had progressive views for the government, which meant that the government would be more active in regulating trusts like theirs. There is also evidence that Carnegie and Morgan were in contact with one another, as Carnegie sold Morgan his steel industry in 1901, which was the exact same year Roosevelt had become president due to McKinley's assassination. Both men most likely had one commonality, which was to kill Roosevelt because both men lost money and power due to Roosevelt's progressive ideals. Also, Carnegie was in close contact and connection to most of the living presidents, and that may have led to him to hear about some of Roosevelt's intentions with the government if he were to become president. Also, another key clue was that both of these men could have been the possible murderers since they held the Harper's Weekly, which could have belonged to either men since they wanted to keep a close and up-to-date eye on Roosevelt's actions. So as we take a closer look and a closer glance at Carnegie and his motives, we can see that aside from the economic setback that Roosevelt dealt to both Carnegie and Morgan, Carnegie also had another motive to kill Roosevelt. He did not first, and that motive is that he did not agree with how Roosevelt handled foreign affairs, specifically in Roosevelt's conquest of the Philippines. Now, when Roosevelt was vice president, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy, which allowed him to conquer other nations, and he carried on these actions and policies into his presidency, where he continued to intervene with other countries and their affairs, such as the Philippines. And now, Carnegie did not agree with Roosevelt at all, because he believed that if a country like the Philippines, who were fighting for their freedom and independence, they should not be controlled and therefore should gain their freedom. Now, Roosevelt, on the other hand, he felt that it was necessary to control these people, and it also provided a naval base as well as preventing other nations from gaining that territory, which would provide easier access to be near the U.S. However, Carnegie believed that the Filipino people should still be free. So essentially, these conflicting ideas about foreign affairs between Roosevelt and Carnegie was yet another motive that Carnegie had to kill Roosevelt. So as you can see here, these are some pieces of evidence that could relate to Carnegie. First of all, these foreign coins, in which Carnegie actually took multiple trips to Scotland, in which he could also have maybe brought foreign coins back. As well as a letter in which he had written a letter to his friend saying that, "Thanks, my friends and I know we are going to do it." And it could have been addressed to possibly referring to the Anti-Imperialist League. Another one, a blank postcard from the Lake Mohawk Mountains, which he occasionally went there to relax.
Going back to Morgan, he had two additional motives to killing, along with the common motivation for Roosevelt's trust busting shared with Carnegie. Roosevelt directly attacked Morgan's companies right off the bat, claiming that Morgan was in control of a bad trust. So what Roosevelt felt that he had to do was break up Morgan's railroad company. This leads into my next point of another one of Morgan's motivations for the killing of Teddy Roosevelt, and that was that he felt he was being betrayed by the government since he had bailed them out of debt on two separate occasions, once in 1893 and once again in 1907. The government had been in such debt that they turned to Morgan to borrow large sums of money or gold. So one can see how that being attacked by some new guy in power who was in control of a government who he had bailed out twice could be seen as a motivation to kill. Not only was he losing large sums of money, but he was being betrayed by the government that he bailed out.
It concluded that Carnegie and Morgan worked together to assassinate Roosevelt. This was the result of a thorough investigation process which began with first identifying what it meant to be a suspect. We concluded that a suspect would be someone negatively affected by Roosevelt's role in trust busting, conservation efforts, and foreign affairs. After deeply investigating and analyzing the motives of our top four suspects, Carnegie, Morgan, Rockefeller, and Aguinaldo, we concluded that the assassination was performed by a joint coalition of Carnegie and Morgan. Both Carnegie and Morgan had strong motives for assassinating Roosevelt. The one they shared was the assassination of Roosevelt in order to stop the economic loss he caused both businessmen. Because both men had a lot of money and power due to their monopolies in certain industries, both had a lot to lose when Roosevelt became president because of his progressive views for the government to take a more active role in regulating trusts. Therefore, there would be a strong opposition from Carnegie and Morgan towards the possible election of Roosevelt in 1912. Aside from economic downfall, both men had separate reasons for wanting Roosevelt dead. For Carnegie, the reason was Roosevelt's conquest of foreign nations, specifically the Philippines. Carnegie did not agree with Roosevelt's foreign policy of imperialism because he felt that if a country such as the Philippines was willing to fight for its independence, it should be allowed its freedom. For Morgan, Roosevelt's quick attack on the Northern Securities Company is a strong motive for why Morgan would not want Roosevelt in power, lest he attack his business again. Morgan felt betrayed because, after all, he had bailed out the government on two separate occasions when they went into debt. However, the new president, Roosevelt, was not coming in after his big business. Roosevelt had essentially changed the fate of big businessmen like Morgan by paving the way for future presidents to be big trust busters as well. In conclusion, the strong connection between Carnegie and Morgan meant that they could have worked together to take the government back to the ways of the Gilded Age, in which big businesses easily prospered without little intervention from the government. In addition to economic motivations, Carnegie would be able to eliminate America's involvement in conquest of other nations, as assassinating Roosevelt would mean stopping a very imperialistic president